about my presentation today that it might not be as cool or dispassionate as some academic presentations are. Rather, I'll state my thesis right up front. I am begging you, the listeners, to understand that our polity, policies, language, and stance toward LGBTQ people in the United Methodist Church, and particularly youth, are doing devastating harm. LGBTQIA plus youth and young adults are not issues to be discussed. They are lives that are hanging in jeopardy. My program today is to speak briefly from a biblical foundation, but then consider how the struggle in the United Methodist Church is really about that question. As a denomination, and even as Methodist individuals, we are trying to hold two opposing beliefs at the same time about what is worth keeping. And I want to finish with a very practical set of suggestions as to how we might bring our beliefs into focus with one another. Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it." The Hebrew verb shamar appears for the first time here. Translated as keep, it is also variously translated as watch over, protect, guard. In other words, to value it, to even cherish it as God's initial sacrament to humanity, the earth. The verb appears shortly after this initial use as Cain has slain his brother Abel. God asks where Abel is, and Cain replies, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Shamar, a watcher over, protector, guardian, valuing, even cherishing his brother. No, he is not. And thereby Cain rejects God's second sacrament to him, another human being. You know, it's interesting that verb shamar appears right frequently in the Hebrew Bible, and the vast majority of the succeeding references are instructions, usually by Moses, to keep, watch over, protect, guard, and value something else. The laws, ordinances, and statutes given at Sinai. Because the law is a living symbol of covenant relationship between God and Israel, because God shamarred the people, valuing them, liberating them from the yoke of oppression. The Greek word that stands in for shamar in the Septuagint is philoso, and it also has these connotations. It doesn't appear very often in the New Testament. But when given a list of commandments by Jesus to follow to inherit eternal life, including the love of neighbor as oneself, a rich man replies, "I have kept all these commandments, valued them, guarded them. What do I still lack?" And so Jesus then tells him how to really keep the commandments. Go and sell everything you have and give it to the poor. In other words, genuine acts of caring, valuing the other, especially a poor sister or brother. That is how one values the law. So when keeping a sibling, another human being, a walking sacrament, comes into direct conflict with keeping God's commandments, how do we decide which is more important? Which one do we keep? And the United Methodist Church is struggling with what it believes is worth keeping. It seems that every so often we just go through a cycle of this. With race, are African American people to be guarded, protected, and valued? With the roles of women in the church, are they to be valued and highly regarded? We say and we communicate that we believe so. However, there is this conflict of beliefs. Theologian and philosopher Peter Rollins writes in a blog post about the difference between cognitive belief and operative belief. In the West, he says, we're so prone to think that beliefs operate at the level of the mind, cognitive belief. However, what goes on in the mind has no necessary connection or relation to the material reality of our operative beliefs, those that we enact. So when it comes to the matters of marriage and ordination of LGB people, we're not even going to talk about T yet, our cognitive and operative beliefs are in line with one another for the most part, certainly so where I live. However, when it comes to the preservation of human life, in particular the lives of LGBTQIA plus youth and young adults, we are telling two different stories. We say in the discipline, right in the social principles, we believe we have a responsibility to innovate, sponsor, and evaluate new forms of community that will encourage development of the fullest potential in individuals. Primary for us is the gospel understanding that all persons are important. Therefore, we support social climates in which human communities are maintained and strengthened for the sake of all persons and their growth. I love this sentence. We also encourage all individuals to be sensitive to others by using appropriate language when referring to all persons. Shortly thereafter, in the section on human sexuality, we say as a church, we affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God, and we implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to the be in ministry for and with all persons. Our cognitive belief is that we will preserve life, encourage the development of the fullest potential in individuals using appropriate language, like pronouns of their choice. We say that all persons are of sacred worth, imploring families and churches not to reject LGBTQIA plus people, but our operative belief often states otherwise, which begs the question, are we our siblings' keeper? In 2009, my family and I moved to the Greater Toronto area, where I was privileged to work with youth in United Church of Canada. I saw there firsthand the difference it could make when a church's cognitive and operative beliefs aligned for the purposes of human flourishing. And in 2014, I moved back down to my home annual conference and was appointed to a church in Dothan, Alabama. At the 2016 session of that annual conference, a resolution was brought to the floor by a clergy person who works closely with the youth in his congregation. And having witnessed the rough lives of those LGBTQIA plus youth in his charge, he shaped a resolution that was entirely in line with our cognitive beliefs. The whereases had all of that wonderful affirming language in the book of discipline, and then invited the conference to resolve that our churches would educate families about how to respond with love to their youth who share their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression that may not conform to their family's expectations, and encouraging churches to maintain safe spaces and not severing ties with their youth. And we watched during the deliberations about that resolution in stunned disbelief, as it was clear it was doomed for failure and had to be referred to the Board of Church and Society just to prevent the worst optics possible. It was clear at that moment, as an annual conference, we were not our siblings' keeper. I don't have UMC specific data on the lives of our queer kids, but we are the largest mainline denomination in the United States, the Chevrolet of churches, as one scholar has called us. So I'm going to assume that the national data about LGBTQ mental health obtains for our young people as well. I'm not going to read a lot of these metrics. However, I'm going to attach a document to this video so that you can go and you can see, but you know what they are. The horribly increased rates of suicide, how more than half of transgender people have seriously considered suicide, the levels of depression, etc. What I want to talk about is why those metrics get developed in the first place. Well, it happens because their identities have been disintegrated. The deepest parts of who they are, their sexual orientation and their faith in God, have been wounded and set in opposition to one another by their church's inability to accept them. It's almost like these youth become the separation between cognitive and operative belief that the church is. You know, I'm not talking about ordination and marriage here, as important as they are in the category of acceptance. I'm talking about basic human acceptance on the level of family and of church. The two go together because as the church models response to youth and nuclear families, that's what the church does. It functions like a model, but not on the level of cognitive belief. It's on that operative level of belief that families shape their children. LGBT young adults who reported high levels of family rejection during adolescence were 8.5 times more likely to have attempted suicide, 6 more times likely to have high levels of depression, 3.5 more times likely to use illegal drugs than peers from families that reported no or low levels of family rejection. And then intersectionality makes all of those factors exponentially worse. If a young person is trans and black, the chances of death by either suicide or homicide are far greater. But the good news is that family acceptance in adolescence is associated with young adult positive health outcomes and is protective for negative health outcomes. It does not take that much. And I understand that just as there are churches on the journey toward affirming these young people, families too are on a journey. Just one affirming life One affirming person in the life of one of these youth, just one, can lower the rates of negativity. And it is important to get this right in church and family because we are sending our kids to school every day. Because if church and family reject them, then school life can seal the deal toward death and despair. Go to glsen.org and find the fact sheet on school climate in your state. Read it and weep. What can we do? Now, this is what I really want to talk about, practical steps. Churches are at varying points on the journey toward inclusion. There's a taxonomy that's been developed by Anthony Van Brown, which is pretty simple. There's the anti-gay, position, right? We don't want you here and you're going to hell. There's a welcoming sort of position. Come in and sit down and listen, and if you change, you can go to heaven. An accepting place, come and stay, but you do have to be celibate. I think you'll get to heaven, but who knows? It's kind of confusing. And then this affirming position that you are welcome here with your partner. What gifts do you bring to serve God through this church? It's important to find out where we are as individuals on that journey and where our churches are as well in order to be able to do practically good things. You may be in an area like I am where there are no fully affirming United Methodist churches, not a single reconciling church in our annual conference, but there are reconciling people in every congregation. I work closely with reconciling ministries in our annual conference, and our latest effort to start groups in districts and localities have taken off like wildfire. If you're an affirming person, get involved with RMN. The congregation that I currently serve is full of the most wonderful people, but it is assuredly not a fully affirming congregation. I would say that they are on the margin of welcoming and accepting. There are queer people in our congregation, and they are closed or quiet about their orientation, but they love their church. So what can you do to preserve life if you are a welcoming or accepting, not a fully affirming congregation? Mainly, don't talk negatively. That's how you will save lives if you cannot completely affirm LGBTQ youth. Just don't say things that you would normally say. Keep your thoughts to yourself and smile. I'm overweight by 100 pounds. No one ever singles me out for the sin of gluttony. So if a gay or lesbian couple come to your church, really there's no need to talk about how you love the sinner and hate the sin. You just smile at them and hand them a bulletin. I'm from the South, and you know what your mama said if you can't say anything nice. But can you make what you do think about clear? Can you put a statement in your bulletin that expresses the truth of where you are? These exist on the internet. There's one that I read that includes this statement in the middle. We affirm that every person has worth and is a bearer of God's image. Although we have a diversity of opinion about the biblical guidance on marriage between same-sex couples, we believe we are called to create loving places where people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender will feel included as part of our church family. It's just honest. So what can you do to preserve life if you are an affirming person in a welcoming or accepting congregation? I'll have to do this really quickly because my time's running out. First, go to rmnetwork.org and see if there is a reconciling ministry team already doing this work in your annual conference. I guarantee there is. If there's one in our annual conference, got to be one in yours. Find allies. Make careful approaches to folks who might be like-minded and see if they are having inclusive thoughts. There's strength in numbers. Learn together. Watch the documentary For the Bible Tells Me So. Do a book study. Read Torn by Justin Lee and talk about it. Become visible in your congregation. It doesn't take much to draw eyes. Wear a rainbow pin, and I can guarantee you'll quickly find them that appreciate you and them that don't. Connect with your pastor and youth leader and ask them to review these statistics from GLSEN for your state and find out where they are personally on their journey toward affirmation. There are a lot of other things that you can do as well. I want to ask you to do this. Go to a PFLAG chapter near you, and listen to the stories of these young people. Lord, haste the day when we enact what we say we believe about the sacredness of all people